never amount to anything." Those words from my own son still ring in my ears, even after all this time. They cut deeper than any knife could, leaving wounds that no medicine can fully heal. When the person you sacrificed everything for looks you in the eye and treats you like garbage, it changes something fundamental inside you. My name is Margaret Wilson. I'm 74 years old, born and raised in Savannah, Georgia, with its ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss and air thick with Southern hospitality. At least that's what the tourists see. What they don't see are the quiet betrayals that happen behind closed doors, in well-maintained homes with perfect lawns, where mothers like me are discarded when we're no longer useful. For 43 years, I taught chemistry at Savannah Central High School. I still remember the smell of the laboratory, a mixture of cleaning supplies and possibility. I loved watching students' eyes light up when they finally understood a difficult concept, how a simple chemical reaction could make them believe in magic again. Teaching wasn't just my profession, it was my calling. But being a mother, that was the greatest experiment of my life. When my husband Thomas died from a sudden heart attack, David was only 8 years old. I still remember his little hand clutching mine at the funeral, his blue eyes wide with confusion and fear. "It's just you and me now, kiddo," I told him, forcing a smile despite my shattered heart. "But we're going to be okay, I promise." And I meant it with every fiber of my being. Those early years were hard. I'd grade papers late into the night after putting David to bed, planning lessons while cooking breakfast, scheduling parent-teacher conferences around his baseball games. There was never enough time, never enough money, never enough of me to go around. But somehow, we made it work. I picked up extra tutoring jobs on weekends and taught summer school every year so David could have the things other kids had. The right sneakers, baseball equipment, eventually a used car for his 16th birthday that I'd saved 3 years to afford. When college applications rolled around, I remortgaged our modest home to make sure he could attend Georgia Tech without crushing student debt. "You're investing in my future, Mom," he'd say, hugging me with those strong arms that had once been so small I could encircle them with my thumb and forefinger. "I'll take care of you when I'm successful. You'll never have to worry about money again." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my son, my only child, the center of my universe. When he graduated with honors in engineering, I sat in that audience bursting with pride, wearing a dress I'd found on clearance but saved for this special occasion. "That's my boy," I whispered to no one in particular as he crossed the stage in his cap and gown, the first Wilson to earn a college degree. Life was good for a while. David landed a position at a prestigious engineering firm in Atlanta. He'd drive down to Savannah some weekends, bringing fancy coffees and telling me stories about his exciting new life. I noticed the changes gradually, how he'd wince when I used certain expressions, how he'd correct my grammar or suggest different clothes, more appropriate for someone your age. I chalked it up to growing pains, the natural distance that forms when children become adults with their own lives. Then came Charlotte. The first time David brought her to Savannah, I spent 3 days cleaning the house, prepared all his favorite Southern dishes, and even bought new guest towels I couldn't really afford. Charlotte Radcliffe was beautiful in that polished way that speaks of expensive skincare routines and regular salon visits. She was from old Atlanta money, educated at Emory, and worked in art acquisition for corporate clients. Next to her, I felt rough and unrefined, like a piece of coal beside a diamond. "Your home is quaint, Mrs. Wilson," she said, running a manicured finger along my bookshelf. "So full of character." The way she said character made it clear she meant outdated or worse. Throughout that weekend, I watched my son transform into someone I barely recognized. He laughed differently around her, a higher, more affected laugh. He interrupted me when I tried to tell stories from his childhood. "Mom, no one wants to hear about that," he'd say with a tight smile, while Charlotte would squeeze his hand reassuringly. When they announced their engagement 6 months later, I was conflicted, happy that my son had found someone he loved, worried about the person he became in her presence. But I did what mothers do. I smiled, I congratulated them, I offered to help with wedding preparations however I could. That's sweet, Mrs. Wilson, but we've already hired the best wedding planner in Atlanta, Charlotte told me. We're thinking the St. Regis for the venue. It's where Daddy proposed to Mother. The wedding planning excluded me almost entirely. My role was reduced to providing addresses for distant relatives and deciding what to wear, a decision that was ultimately taken from me when Charlotte's mother sent over a stylist with a dress in my size. We thought this would photograph better with the wedding palette, the stylist explained apologetically. I was not asked to give a speech at the rehearsal dinner. I was not included in the bridal shower. When I arrived at the church on the wedding day, I was directed to a seat in the third row, not the front, where the mother of the groom traditionally sits. Charlotte's family occupied both sides of the front row, her 3 sisters serving as bridesmaids, while David's childhood best friend was relegated to groomsman number 4. Throughout the reception, I was introduced as David's mother without my name, as if my identity had been reduced to my relationship to the groom. I overheard Charlotte's father telling someone I was a simple school teacher, with the same tone one might use to describe someone who collected garbage for a living. Despite everything, I danced with my son as tradition dictated. For a brief moment, as we swayed to the music, I saw a flicker of my David, the real David, in his eyes. "You look beautiful, Mom," he said softly. "Are you having a good time?" "Of course, honey," I lied, blinking back tears. "I'm so happy for you." The next morning, they came to my house unexpectedly. I was still in my robe, drinking coffee and flipping through photos of happier times. David's graduation, our trip to Tybee Island when he was 12, his first science fair win. The doorbell rang, and there they stood. Charlotte in a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. David looking uncomfortable in a button-down shirt and pressed khakis. "Mom, we need to talk to you about something important," he said as they sat down on my sofa. Charlotte's eyes were already roaming around my living room, lingering on the worn carpet, the outdated wallpaper, the family photos in mismatched frames. "We've been thinking about our future," Charlotte began, her voice syrupy sweet, "about starting a family of our own." I smiled, momentarily hopeful. Grandchildren? Was this good news after all? "This neighborhood has excellent schools," she continued, "and this house has such good bones despite its current condition. We think it would be perfect for us to raise our children here." My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. "What are you saying?" David cleared his throat. "Mom, we want to buy the house from you. It makes financial sense for us, and it's in a great location for Charlotte's commute." "Buy my house? But this is my home. Where would I go?" Charlotte leaned forward, placing her hand on my knee in a gesture of false compassion. "We've researched some lovely retirement communities, Mrs. Wilson. Golden Oaks has wonderful amenities, a swimming pool, crafting classes, movie nights. It would be perfect for someone at your stage of life, my stage of life, as if I were already 1 foot in the grave at 67. "I appreciate your concern," I said carefully, setting down my coffee cup before my shaking hands could betray me. "But I'm not ready for a retirement community. I'm still teaching part-time. My friends are here. My life is here." David's face hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "Mom, be reasonable. This house is too big for you to maintain alone. You're getting older. What happens when you fall on those stairs? Who's going to help you?" "I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself in this house," I said, my voice stronger now. "And this has been my home for 40 years. Your father and I bought it together. Every corner holds memories." "Memories don't pay for needed renovations," Charlotte muttered under her breath. I turned to her, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. "This house may not meet your standards, Charlotte, but it's mine, and it's not for sale." David stood up suddenly, color flooding his face. "This is so typical. You've always been stubborn and selfish. All my life you've guilt-tripped me about the sacrifices you made. Well, what about my needs? What about my future?" His words struck like physical blows. Stubborn? Selfish? When had I ever put myself before him? "David, please," I began. But he cut me off. "No, Mom. It's time you listened. This house should be my inheritance anyway. All these years you've said everything I have will be yours someday. Well, why not now, when it would actually help me?" "Because I'm still alive," I shouted, surprising myself with my volume. This isn't about the house, is it? This is about you being embarrassed by me, by where you come from." The look on his face confirmed what I'd suspected for months. My son, my brilliant, accomplished son, was ashamed of me. "Fine," he said coldly, grabbing Charlotte's hand. "Keep your precious house. But don't come crying to us when you can't manage anymore. Don't expect us to drop everything when you need help." As they headed for the door, I called after him. "David, please don't leave like this. We can talk about it when everyone's calmer." That's when he turned, his face contorted with an anger I'd never seen before, and spat the words that would change our relationship forever. "You know what? Go live with the pigs on the farm for all I care. You're nothing but a burden anyway." The door slammed behind them, leaving me alone in the sudden silence of my home, the home I'd raised him in, the only remnant of his presence, the lingering scent of Charlotte's expensive perfume. What my son didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that his cruel suggestion wasn't the devastating blow he intended. Because for the past 6 months, while he'd been planning his wedding and apparently plotting to take my home, I had been quietly preparing for a future I somehow sensed was coming, a future that ironically involved a farm and even a few pigs, though not in the way my son so dismissively imagined. Teaching chemistry wasn't my first dream. As a young girl growing up in Savannah, I wanted to be a research scientist, working in a prestigious laboratory making discoveries that would change the world. But life has a way of redirecting our paths. My father's early death meant college funds disappeared, and my mother needed help supporting my younger siblings. The teaching program at the local college offered scholarships and a clear path to stable employment, so I adjusted my dreams and never looked back. I met Thomas during my second year teaching at Savannah Central. He was fixing the ventilation system in the science wing, a quiet man with thoughtful eyes and hands that could repair anything. Our courtship was simple: picnics in Forsyth Park, walks along River Street at sunset, Sunday drives to Tybee Island. When he proposed after 8 months, offering a modest ring that had belonged to his grandmother, I didn't hesitate. We married in the small Methodist church where I'd grown up. Honeymoon money diverted to a down payment on our little house on Maple Street. Thomas and I tried for years to have a child. 4 miscarriages later, I had almost given up hope when I became pregnant with David. The pregnancy was difficult. Bed rest for the final trimester, blood pressure concerns, early contractions. But the moment they placed that red-faced, squalling baby on my chest, I understood what true love was. Thomas cried, his calloused hands trembling as he stroked our son's dark hair. "He's perfect, Maggie," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect." Those early years were magical. Despite the sleepless nights and financial struggles, David was a curious child, always taking things apart to see how they worked. Thomas would sit with him on the porch, patiently showing him how to reassemble an old radio or fix a broken toy. "He's got an engineer's mind," my husband would say proudly. "Wants to understand the mechanics of everything." David was 5 when he announced he wanted to be an inventor, showing us a contraption made of cardboard tubes and string that would automatically feed the neighbor's cat. It didn't work, of course, but Thomas treated that creation like it belonged in the Smithsonian. We were an ordinary family, living an ordinary life, filled with extraordinary love. Then came the morning Thomas complained of heartburn that wouldn't go away. I insisted he see a doctor, but he went to work anyway, promising to make an appointment later. The call came at 10:47 a.m. Thomas had collapsed at the job site. By the time I reached the hospital, he was gone. Massive heart attack, the doctor said. Nothing could have been done. Telling an 8-year-old boy that his father is never coming home is a special kind of torture. David didn't cry at first. He just stared at me with those big blue eyes, Thomas's eyes, and asked, "But who's going to teach me to build a treehouse like he promised?" That's when my own tears finally came. Great heaving sobs as I pulled my son into my arms and held on as if he might disappear too. The insurance money helped for a while, but it wasn't enough for long-term security. I took on extra work wherever I could find it, tutoring gifted students after school, teaching summer school, even working weekends at the local pharmacy for a few years. My mother helped when she could, watching David after school until her arthritis got too bad. Friends from church dropped off casseroles and offered rides to David's baseball games when my ancient Chevy was in the shop again. Throughout it all, I made sure David never felt the full weight of our financial struggles. His school clothes might have come from discount stores, but they were always clean and properly fitted. We couldn't afford fancy summer camps, but I created science camp in our kitchen, with experiments designed to nurture his engineering mind. Christmas gifts were few but carefully chosen. Construction sets, science kits, books about famous inventors. When other kids went to Disney World, we took road trips to museums and historic sites, packing sandwiches to save on restaurant costs. David thrived despite, or perhaps because of, our modest circumstances. He excelled in school, particularly in mathematics and science. His science fair projects won regional competitions. By high school, he was taking advanced placement courses and tutoring younger students in algebra and physics. I swelled with pride at every parent-teacher conference, hearing how bright, how motivated, how exceptional my son was. When college application time came, I insisted he apply to prestigious engineering programs despite the cost. "We'll figure it out," I promised. "Your talent deserves the best education." When the acceptance letter from Georgia Tech arrived, we danced around the kitchen like fools, laughing and crying at the same time. That night, after David went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with calculator and notepad, trying to make impossible numbers work. The solution came at significant personal cost. I refinanced the house I'd spent 20 years paying for, took a loan against my modest retirement account, and increased my teaching load to include evening classes at the community college. The schedule was brutal: teaching all day, additional classes 3 nights a week, grading papers until midnight, up at 5 a.m. to prepare lessons. But watching David thrive at Georgia Tech made every exhausted moment worthwhile. During his freshman year, David lived in the dorms, coming home for holidays and occasional weekends. Sophomore year, he moved into an apartment with engineering friends, his visits becoming less frequent. I noticed subtle changes each time I saw him: designer clothes replacing his practical wardrobe, a new accent that smoothed the edges of his southern drawl, references to restaurants and experiences far beyond our usual world. "Mom, you have to try this coffee," he'd say, bringing exotic beans from Atlanta shops. "It's Ethiopian, single origin. You can really taste the difference." Or he'd look around our familiar living room and suggest, "You should really update this place. Nobody uses floral patterns anymore." I'd smile and nod, not mentioning that decorating trends were the least of my concerns when the roof needed repairs and the water heater was on its last legs. During his junior year, David secured a prestigious internship with an engineering firm in Atlanta. His excitement was contagious as he described the cutting-edge projects, the networking opportunities, the possibility of a job offer after graduation. What he didn't say, but I could clearly see, was that he was moving into a different world, one where last season's clothes mattered and the right connections opened doors, a world increasingly distant from our modest home on Maple Street. Senior year brought both triumph and tension. David was offered a full-time position with the engineering firm, starting immediately after graduation. The salary he mentioned casually over dinner one night was more than twice what I made after decades of teaching. I was thrilled for his success, while acutely aware of the widening gap between us. "You don't need to keep teaching those extra classes anymore, Mom," he told me during Christmas break. "I can help with bills now." The offer was generous but stung in ways I couldn't articulate. My son didn't understand that my sacrifices had never been a burden I resented. They were expressions of unconditional love, willingly given. Graduation day arrived warm and sunny. I wore my best dress, slightly outdated but carefully pressed, and sat among thousands of parents in the vast auditorium. When David crossed the stage in his cap and gown, I thought my heart might burst with pride. This was the culmination of everything: Thomas's dreams for our son, my years of hard work, David's own brilliant mind and determination. I couldn't stop the tears flowing down my cheeks. Afterward, navigating through the crowd to find him, I spotted David standing with a group of classmates and well-dressed parents. For a moment I hesitated, suddenly self-conscious about my simple dress and sensible shoes among the designer outfits surrounding my son. Then David looked up, saw me, and his face lit with a smile that erased all my insecurities. He broke away from the group and embraced me tightly. "We did it, Mom," he whispered. "We really did it." The next few years passed in a blur of transitions. David moved into a sleek apartment in Atlanta's Buckhead neighborhood, quickly climbing the corporate ladder at his engineering firm. I retired from full-time teaching, but continued with part-time classes, unwilling to completely abandon the profession that had sustained us. My house grew quieter, my routines more solitary, but I found joy in my garden, my book club, my volunteer work at the Children's Hospital. David's visits became less frequent, his calls shorter. "Sorry, Mom, things are crazy at work," became his standard explanation. I understood, or told myself I did. He was building his career, establishing himself in a competitive field. When we did speak, his conversations revolved around professional achievements, trendy restaurants, weekend trips to New York or Chicago. I listened enthusiastically while feeling increasingly disconnected from his new reality. Then came Charlotte. I first heard her name during a brief phone call. David mentioning casually that he was seeing someone special. A month later, he called to say he was bringing her to Savannah for the weekend. "She's from an old Atlanta family," he explained. "Very sophisticated. I really want you two to get along." The implied message was clear. Please don't embarrass me. I spent days preparing, cleaning every corner of the house, planning meals that seemed sufficiently impressive without appearing to try too hard, even buying new guest towels for the bathroom. Standing in my kitchen, surveying the freshly baked peach cobbler, David's childhood favorite, and homemade rolls, I felt a flutter of anxiety. Would my best efforts measure up to Charlotte's expectations? To the new standards my son seemed to have adopted? From the moment they arrived, I sensed the shift in dynamics. David was simultaneously hyper-attentive to Charlotte's every reaction and hyper-vigilant about my behavior. When I reached out to hug him, he offered a quick, stiff embrace before turning to introduce Charlotte Radcliffe, tall, willowy, with perfect hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "What a unique home you have, Mrs. Wilson," she said, glancing around my living room. The slight pause before unique spoke volumes. I watched as her gaze lingered on the worn armchair where I read in the evenings, the collection of mismatched photo frames on the mantel, the quilt Thomas's mother had made for our wedding. In her eyes, I could see each cherished item being categorized as shabby, outdated, inferior. That weekend established a pattern that would continue throughout their relationship. Charlotte would make polite but pointed observations. "Oh, you still use that kind of cookware? Everyone in Atlanta has switched to ceramic coated." David would jump in with awkward explanations. "Mom never had time to keep up with cooking trends. She was too busy working." I would smile and change the subject, pretending not to notice the subtext. During dinner that first visit, I made the mistake of sharing a story about young David's determination to build a robot from household appliance parts. He dismantled our only vacuum cleaner. Thomas was so upset, but then David showed us his detailed drawings for putting it back together and— "Mom," David interrupted, "Charlotte doesn't need to hear old stories." His tone was light, but his eyes conveyed a clear message. "Stop. Just stop." Later that evening, I overheard them talking in the guest room, Charlotte's voice carrying through the thin walls. "She's sweet, David, but so provincial. Does she ever travel? Read anything current? And that accent. I can barely understand her sometimes." His response cut deeper than anything Charlotte could have said. "I know. It's embarrassing, but she did her best, considering everything. Just one more day, then we're back to civilization." 6 months later, David called with news of their engagement. Despite the hurt still lingering from that overheard conversation, I responded with genuine happiness. My son had found someone he loved, who would build a life with him. What mother wouldn't celebrate that? "We're thinking a spring wedding," he said. "Nothing too elaborate, just 300 of our closest friends at the St. Regis. 300 people, at one of Atlanta's most exclusive hotels. Nothing elaborate." "That sounds lovely, dear," I replied, mentally calculating what I could contribute to such an extravaganza. "Just let me know what you need me to help with." Actually, Charlotte's mother has everything under control. She's hired the best wedding planner in Atlanta, but we'll need your family's addresses for invitations. And so it went. Month after month of wedding preparations, in which I was merely an observer, occasionally consulted, but never truly included. Charlotte's mother hosted the engagement party, the bridal shower, the rehearsal dinner. I received invitations like any other guest. My role as mother of the groom seemingly a technicality rather than a position of honor. When I gently inquired about traditions, the mother-son dance, a small speech at the rehearsal dinner, David became visibly uncomfortable. Charlotte's family has their own traditions, Mom. Her father is handling the toasts, and we're doing a father-daughter dance, but skipping the mother-son thing. It's not really our style. Not our style. The word choice wasn't lost on me. The wedding itself was exactly as advertised, elaborate despite claims to the contrary, meticulous in every detail, and orchestrated to showcase Charlotte's family connections and status. I was seated in the third row at the ceremony, behind various Radcliffe relatives and family friends. At the reception, I found myself at a table far from the wedding party, surrounded by distant cousins and colleagues who seemed equally peripheral to the celebration. Throughout the evening, I was introduced repeatedly as David's mother, rather than by my name. Charlotte's mother made a point of explaining to anyone who would listen. Margaret was a dedicated teacher, single mother. Such a struggle for her, but look how well David turned out despite everything. The narrative being constructed was clear. David had succeeded not because of me, but in spite of me. I maintained my dignity throughout the endless evening, smiling graciously, dancing with a distant uncle when asked, complimenting the elaborate floral arrangements and 7-tier cake. If anyone noticed the hurt behind my eyes, they were kind enough not to mention it. This was David's day after all. His happiness was what mattered, even if it seemed increasingly tied to a world that had no place for me. That night, alone in my hotel room, I allowed myself the tears I'd been holding back, not just for the wedding, but for the gradual loss that had been happening for years. With each step up the socio-economic ladder, my son had moved further away from our shared history, from the values I thought I'd instilled, from me. The gap between us wasn't just about money or status. It was about belonging, about identity, about what and who he valued. I never imagined that the next day would bring the final heartbreaking revelation of just how complete that transformation was. That the son I had raised with endless love and sacrifice would look me in the eye and tell me to go live with the pigs. But as devastating as that moment would be, it would also become the unexpected catalyst for the most remarkable chapter of my life. Because sometimes, when people show you exactly who they are and what they think of you, they free you to become something they could never imagine. After a restless night in my hotel room, I returned to my empty house. The wedding festivities were over, and an unsettling quietness settled over me. I spent Sunday puttering in my garden, deadheading roses and pulling weeds, trying to process the events of the past few days. The physical labor helped calm my mind, the familiar scent of Georgia soil grounding me as I worked through complex emotions. By evening, I had reached a state of tentative peace. Yes, the wedding had been difficult. Yes, I felt increasingly estranged from my son. But surely things would normalize now. The stress of wedding planning was behind us. Perhaps David and Charlotte would settle into married life and find time for more genuine connections. Monday morning dawned bright and clear. I was enjoying my second cup of coffee on the back porch, watching cardinals flit between the azalea bushes, when I heard a car pull into my driveway. Curious, I walked through the house to the front door. There stood David and Charlotte, still in their honeymoon attire. He in pressed khakis and a light blue button-down, she in white linen pants and a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly pension. They were supposed to be on their way to the Bahamas for a 2-week honeymoon. Why were they at my doorstep? David, Charlotte, what a surprise, I said, genuinely confused. Is everything all right? Your flight? Everything's fine, Mom, David interrupted, his tone businesslike. We have a few hours before we need to be at the airport. Can we come in? There's something important we need to discuss. I stepped aside, an uneasy feeling settling in my stomach. Their body language was tense, formal. This wasn't a casual visit or a warm farewell before their trip. "Would you like some coffee?" I offered, falling back on Southern hospitality as a shield against my growing anxiety. "No, thank you, Mrs. Wilson," Charlotte replied, perching on the edge of my sofa, as if afraid it might soil her pristine outfit. "This won't take long." I sat in my worn armchair, the one Thomas had always favored, drawing strength from its familiar embrace. "What's this about?" David cleared his throat, exchanging a quick glance with Charlotte before speaking. "Mom, we've been doing a lot of thinking about our future, about starting a family, establishing our home, planning for the next phase of our lives." "That's wonderful," I said cautiously, still unable to see where this conversation was heading. Charlotte took over, her voice smooth as polished marble. "As you know, the Atlanta real estate market is quite competitive right now, and we've been considering our options carefully." David jumped back in. "The thing is, Mom, this neighborhood is perfect for raising children. Great schools, safe streets, close enough to Atlanta for my commute, but far enough to avoid the worst of the city problems." I nodded slowly, the pieces beginning to click into place with sickening clarity. And Charlotte continued, "this house has such wonderful potential. The lot size is generous. The structure is sound despite its dated features. With the right renovations, it could be transformed into exactly the kind of family home we're looking for." My throat tightened. "Are you saying you want to buy my house?" "Exactly," David exclaimed, his relief at having the subject broached evident. "We're prepared to make you a very fair offer, Mom. Above market value, actually." I looked around at the living room where I'd raised my son, where Thomas and I had built our life together. Every corner held memories. The window seat where I'd read stories to David. The doorway where we'd marked his height with pencil each birthday. The fireplace where Thomas had proposed to me all those years ago. This wasn't just a property to be renovated. This was my home. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but I'm not interested in selling. This is my home." Charlotte's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mrs. Wilson, we understand your emotional attachment, but you have to think practically. This house is far too large for just one person. The maintenance alone must be overwhelming." "I managed just fine," I replied, a defensive edge creeping into my voice. David leaned forward, adopting the tone he used when explaining complex concepts to someone he considered intellectually inferior. "Mom, you're not getting any younger. Those stairs are getting steeper every year. The yard work, the repairs. It's too much for someone your age. We're trying to help you." "By taking my home?" I asked, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. "Not taking," Charlotte corrected quickly. "Buying. And we've researched several excellent retirement communities that would be perfect for you. Golden Acres has a wonderful social program, scheduled transportation for shopping, medical staff on site." "A retirement home?" I interrupted, the full reality of their proposition hitting me like a physical blow. "You want to put me in a facility?" "It's not like that, Mom," David said, frustration evident in his tightening jaw. "These are luxury senior living apartments. People like you." "People like me," I echoed. "You mean old people? Inconvenient people? People who should be tucked away so they don't embarrass their successful children?" "That's not fair," he protested, but the flush creeping up his neck told me I'd hit close to the mark. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "David, Charlotte, I understand you're planning your future. That's commendable. But my future plans don't include selling my home or moving into any type of facility, luxury or otherwise." Charlotte's veneer of politeness cracked slightly. "Mrs. Wilson, I don't think you're fully considering the benefits. The financial security alone." "I have financial security," I stated firmly. "My pension, my savings, and yes, this house that's fully paid for. I don't need to sell to be secure." David stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back, agitation evident in every movement. "Mom, we're trying to do what's best for everyone here. This solution makes sense. You get to downsize to something manageable and have money for your retirement. We get a home in a good neighborhood without stretching ourselves financially at the beginning of our marriage. It's practical." "It may be practical for you," I replied, "but it's not what I want." And since it's my house, my wishes should matter. A tense silence fell over the room. Charlotte examined her manicured nails, her disapproval evident. David continued to pace, his breathing becoming more agitated. I remained seated, hands folded in my lap, outwardly calm despite the storm of emotions within. Finally, David stopped directly in front of me. What if we sweetened the deal? Above market value, plus we cover all moving expenses, and we contribute to your monthly fees at Golden Acres for the first year. The calm I'd been maintaining began to fracture. This isn't a negotiation, David. I'm not selling my home. Period. Charlotte made a small, irritated sound in the back of her throat. David, we should go. Clearly your mother isn't being reasonable right now. Reasonable? I repeated, anger finally breaking through. Is it unreasonable to want to keep living in my own home? Is it unreasonable to expect my son to respect my wishes? David's face darkened. What about respecting our wishes, our needs? You always said this house would be mine someday. Someday, David, after I'm gone. Not while I'm still very much alive and capable of living independently. Capable? He scoffed. Mom, be realistic. You're almost 70. How much longer can you manage this place? The roof needs work. The plumbing is ancient. The electrical should have been updated decades ago. Those are my concerns, not yours, I replied, my voice surprisingly steady despite my racing heart. Charlotte stood, smoothing her immaculate pants. David, we're going to miss our flight if we don't leave soon. Perhaps your mother needs time to think about our offer more, rationally. The condescension in her tone was the final straw. I also rose to my feet, drawing myself up to my full height, still a good 3 inches taller than Charlotte despite my age. I don't need time to think, I said clearly. This is my home. It is not for sale to you or anyone else. When I decide I can no longer manage here, if that day ever comes, I will make my own arrangements. I don't need my choices made for me. David's face contorted with a rage I had never seen before. Gone was my sweet boy, who had once made me Mother's Day cards with carefully cut paper flowers. In his place stood a stranger, a man consumed by entitlement and frustration at not getting his way. You've always been like this, he shouted, making both Charlotte and me flinch with the sudden volume. Stubborn, set in your ways, refusing to see reason. David, Charlotte murmured, placing a restraining hand on his arm. The neighbors will hear. He shook her off. I don't care. She needs to hear this. Mom, you've been guilting me my whole life about the sacrifices you made. Like I should forever be grateful, forever indebted to you. Well, here's a chance for you to do something for me. For once! The injustice of his words struck me like physical blows. Never had I thrown my sacrifices in his face. Never had I asked for gratitude beyond what any parent might hope for from a child they'd raised with love. I have never, I said, my voice trembling now, made you feel indebted. Everything I did was from love, not to create obligation. But yes, I had hoped for basic respect in return. Respect? He laughed bitterly. You want respect? Then act respectable. Move with the times. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it was having you at our wedding? Your outdated dress, your thick accent, the way you talked to the Radcliffe's friends about your gardening club and your discount shopping tips. Each word sliced deeper than the last. I swayed slightly, gripping the back of the armchair for support. I didn't realize I was such a disappointment to you, I managed to say. David, Charlotte hissed, clearly mortified by his outburst. That's enough. We should go. But he wasn't finished. Years of suppressed resentment poured out in a toxic flood. You know what your problem is, Mom? You're stuck in the past, still living like it's 20 years ago, still clinging to this house because Dad bought it, like he's going to walk through that door any minute. He's gone. And all this, he gestured wildly around the room. All this sentimentality is just holding you back, holding me back. Tears filled my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I think you should leave now, David. Gladly, he snapped, grabbing his keys from his pocket with such force that they jangled violently. Come on, Charlotte. We've wasted enough time here. Charlotte, to her credit, looked deeply uncomfortable. Mrs. Wilson, I apologize for the intensity of this conversation. Perhaps we can revisit this topic another time, when emotions aren't so high. I simply nodded. not trusting myself to speak further without breaking down completely. They moved toward the door, David still seething, Charlotte maintaining her composure despite the obvious tension. I followed a few paces behind, determined to see them out with whatever dignity I could salvage. At the threshold, David turned back, his face still flushed with anger. "You know what, Mom? This isn't over. You can't live here forever. Sooner or later, you'll realize we're right." "Perhaps," I replied softly, "but it will be my decision to make when that time comes." Something in my quiet certainty seemed to infuriate him further. He stepped closer, towering over me in a way that might have been intimidating if I hadn't once changed his diapers and soothed his childhood nightmares. "You've got 2 weeks, he said, his voice low and threatening. 2 weeks to reconsider our offer before we start looking elsewhere. Think carefully about what you're giving up by being stubborn." I lifted my chin, meeting his gaze directly. "I don't need 2 weeks, David. My answer won't change. This is my home." That's when it happened. The moment that would simultaneously break my heart and set me free. David's face contorted with a look of pure contempt, his eyes cold as he stared down at the woman who had given him everything. "Fine," he spat. "Have it your way. Stay here until you fall down those stairs and break your hip. Stay until the roof caves in. Stay until you're too feeble to garden or cook or even dress yourself. But don't come crying to me when it all falls apart." He stepped onto the porch, Charlotte already hurrying toward their car, clearly mortified by the scene. But David wasn't finished. He turned back one last time, delivering the final devastating blow. "You know what? Go live with the pigs on the farm for all I care. You're nothing but a burden anyway." The door slammed with such force that the small stained glass panel, a housewarming gift from Thomas's mother 40 years ago, cracked down the middle. A jagged line now split the painted bluebird in two, a perfect metaphor for my shattered heart. I stood frozen in my foyer, listening to their car start and pull away, tires screeching slightly as David accelerated too quickly down the quiet residential street. Only when the sound had completely faded did I allow my legs to give way, sinking to the floor with my back against the door. "Live with the pigs on the farm." The cruel words echoed in my mind, each repetition cutting deeper than the last. My son, my only child, the person I had centered my entire adult life around, saw me as nothing but a burden, a problem to be solved, an obstacle to his plans. I don't know how long I sat there on the hardwood floor, tears flowing freely down my face. Minutes? Hours? Time seemed meaningless in the face of such profound loss. Not the loss of my home, that I had managed to protect, but the loss of the relationship I had cherished above all others. As the afternoon light shifted across my living room, reality began to reassert itself. My legs had gone numb from sitting too long in one position. My throat felt raw from silent sobs, and somewhere deep inside, beneath the crushing pain, a small flame of indignation began to flicker. Who was this person who had spoken to me with such cruelty? Not the son I had raised to be kind, to be thoughtful, to respect others. Not the boy who had once made me breakfast in bed on Mother's Day, spilling orange juice on the tray, but beaming with pride at his efforts. Somewhere along the way, my David had been replaced by someone I barely recognized. Or perhaps, and this thought hurt even more, perhaps this person had been there all along, carefully hidden beneath a veneer of duty and obligation. Perhaps the real David was the one I had glimpsed today, calculating and cold, seeing me as a means to an end rather than a person worthy of basic dignity. I pulled myself up from the floor, muscles protesting after too long in one position. Moving slowly, I made my way to the kitchen and poured a glass of water, drinking deeply to soothe my parched throat. The mundane action helped anchor me to the present moment, pulling me back from the abyss of despair. "Live with the pigs on the farm," I repeated aloud, the words sounding even more absurd in the quiet of my kitchen. A bizarre insult, especially given that neither of us had any connection to farming. David had been raised in suburban Savannah, his only exposure to agriculture the small vegetable garden I maintained in our backyard. And yet, a memory surfaced, something I had nearly forgotten in the emotional chaos of the morning, a phone call from 6 months ago. A former student, now working for an agricultural extension office, mentioning a property for sale outside McDonough. Perfect for someone looking to downsize into something with character, she had said. Small peach orchard, cute farmhouse, enough land to be peaceful but not overwhelming. The owner passed away and the children just want a quick sale. I had thanked her politely but dismissed the idea. Why would I want a farm? My life, my friends, my volunteer work, everything was here in Savannah. But now, standing in my kitchen with my son's cruel words still ringing in my ears, the idea resurfaced with surprising clarity. A farm, a fresh start, a place where I could define myself on my own terms, not as David's mother or Thomas's widow, but simply as Margaret Wilson, a woman with perhaps a few more chapters left to write in her story. The thought should have terrified me. Starting over at 67, in a completely new environment, taking on a challenge I was utterly unprepared for. Instead, I felt the first stirrings of something I hadn't experienced in years. Excitement, possibility, hope. I reached for my phone, scrolling through contacts until I found Jessica Tanner, my former student. My finger hovered over her name for just a moment before I pressed call, setting in motion a chain of events that would transform my life in ways neither David nor I could possibly imagine. Live with the pigs on the farm, he had said, intending it as the ultimate dismissal. Little did he know that his cruelly spoken words would become not a curse, but the unlikely key to my liberation. Jessica answered on the third ring, her voice warm with surprise. "Mrs. Wilson, it's been ages. How are you?" "I'm well, Jessica," I replied, amazed at how steady my voice sounded despite the emotional turmoil of the past few hours. "I'm calling about that property you mentioned a while back, the small farm with the peach orchard. Is it still available?" "The McDonough property? Let me check." I heard keyboard clicks in the background. "Well, look at that. It is. The price has actually dropped since we last spoke. The children are eager to settle the estate." "I'd like to see it," I said, the words feeling surreal even as I spoke them. "As soon as possible." Jessica's surprise was evident. "Really? That's wonderful. I can arrange a showing for tomorrow afternoon if that works for you." The next day found me driving my 12-year-old Toyota along unfamiliar country roads, following GPS directions that seemed to lead further and further from civilization. Just when I began to wonder if I'd made a wrong turn, I spotted Jessica's bright red Subaru parked beside a weathered wooden mailbox. She waved as I pulled up beside her, her smile bright in the midday sun. "Mrs. Wilson, I still can't believe you're interested in this place. It's quite a change from Savannah." "Life is full of unexpected turns," I replied, summoning a smile that felt more genuine than any expression I'd managed since David's cruel departure. We walked up a gravel drive lined with ancient oak trees, their sprawling branches creating a natural canopy. As we rounded a gentle curve, the farmhouse came into view. It was smaller than I'd imagined, a white clapboard structure with a wide front porch and green shutters that needed repainting. A brick chimney rose from the shingled roof, and morning glories climbed trellises on either side of the front steps. "It's not much to look at right now," Jessica admitted, noting my careful scrutiny. "Mr. Jenkins lived here alone for nearly 20 years after his wife passed. The inside is dated, but structurally sound according to the inspection." As we approached, I noticed a wooden swing hanging from the porch ceiling, gently swaying in the breeze. Something about that simple feature, so inviting, so peaceful, touched me unexpectedly. I could picture myself there on summer evenings, watching the sunset with a glass of sweet tea. The interior confirmed Jessica's assessment, dated but sound. Faded wallpaper in the small living room, linoleum floors in the kitchen that had gone out of style decades ago, bathroom fixtures that had seen better days. But the bones of the place were good. Hardwood floors under worn carpets, solid wooden doors with glass knobs, windows that caught the light in ways that made even dusty corners seem welcoming. "There are 2 bedrooms, Jessica explained as we toured the upper floor. "Mr. Jenkins used this one." She opened a door to reveal a Spartan room with a simple bed and dresser. And this was Mrs. Jenkins's sewing room, though he kept it as a sort of shrine to her. The second room was filled with afternoon light, a sewing machine still positioned by the window where Mrs. Jenkins must have sat, watching the orchard as she worked. Someone had lovingly maintained the space. The surfaces were dust-free, a half-completed quilt still draped over a chair, as if awaiting its maker's return. The property is just over 5 acres, Jessica continued as we headed back downstairs and out a back door. Most of it is the peach orchard, about 50 mature trees. There's a small vegetable garden that's gone wild, a tool shed, and that storage barn over there. I followed her gaze to a red barn that had weathered to a soft russet color. Beside it stood a chicken coop, currently empty of inhabitants, but seemingly in good repair. The orchard hasn't been commercially harvested in a couple of years, Jessica explained as we walked among the trees. Mr. Jenkins kept it up for personal use and gave away a lot of fruit to neighbors. The local agricultural extension office says the trees are still quite productive, though they could use some proper pruning. I reached out to touch a low-hanging branch, feeling the roughness of the bark against my fingertips. These trees had stood here for decades, silently bearing fruit year after year, while generations of the Jenkins family lived and loved and eventually left. There was something profoundly reassuring in their steadfast presence. "The soil here is excellent," Jessica was saying, kneeling to scoop up a handful of dark earth. "Perfect drainage, good mineral content. You could grow just about anything." Mr. Jenkins had quite the reputation for his tomatoes, I'm told. As we completed our tour back at the farmhouse porch, Jessica watched me carefully. "It needs work, Mrs. Wilson. I won't sugarcoat that. And it's isolated. Nearest neighbor is half a mile down the road. Nearest grocery store is a 15-minute drive. Are you sure this is what you want?" Was it? 24 hours earlier, I couldn't have imagined myself contemplating such a drastic change. But now, standing on this worn porch with the scent of peach blossoms in the air, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Possibility. "How soon could I close?" I asked. Jessica's eyebrows shot up. "You haven't even asked about the price." I smiled, feeling a strange calm settle over me. "I'm assuming it's within my range, given what you told me about the motivated sellers." 2 weeks later, ironically, the exact time frame David had given me to reconsider his offer, I signed the closing documents on the Jenkins farm. The sellers had accepted my offer, slightly below asking price, with obvious relief. The property was mine. I had used a significant portion of my retirement savings for the purchase and set aside the remainder for necessary renovations and operating expenses. I told no one in Savannah about my plans. Not my book club friends, not my fellow retired teachers, certainly not David. The only person I confided in was my attorney, Mr. Abernathy, who helped arrange the sale of some stocks to fund my new venture and updated my will to reflect my changed circumstances. He raised an eyebrow at my sudden interest in agriculture, but asked no intrusive questions. "Just make sure you have proper insurance," he advised, stamping the final documents, "and perhaps consider a medical alert system given the property's isolation." I nodded, accepting his concern without offense. It was, after all, a reasonable suggestion for a 67-year-old woman moving to a rural property alone. The next phase required careful planning. I couldn't simply abandon my Savannah house. It needed to be properly closed up if I was to be away for extended periods. And the farm required immediate attention if I hoped to salvage any of the current growing season. My solution came in the form of Harold Peterson, a retired agriculture professor I'd met through a community education class on vegetable gardening. When I explained my situation, he was intrigued rather than dismissive. "Organic peach farming at your age? That's ambitious, Margaret," he said, eyes twinkling behind wire-rimmed glasses. "But not impossible. Not at all." Harold introduced me to Eliza Washington, a graduate student in agricultural sciences who was looking for a summer project. "She needs real-world experience. You need expertise," he explained. "Seems like a perfect match." Eliza was 24, brilliant, and bursting with sustainable farming theories she was eager to put into practice. Where I saw an overgrown orchard, she saw potential for a showcase of organic methods. Her enthusiasm was infectious, her knowledge impressive. "Traditional peach farming uses so many chemicals," she explained during our first strategy session at the farm. "But there are natural alternatives for almost everything. Predator insects instead of pesticides, companion planting to improve soil health. strategic pruning to increase air circulation and reduce disease. Together, we drafted a phased plan for the orchard's rehabilitation. Phase 1 would focus on immediate needs, pruning damaged branches, treating any visible disease, preparing the ground for companion plants. Phase 2 would involve more substantial investments, an improved irrigation system, beehives for pollination, soil amendments based on comprehensive testing. The trees won't produce their best crop this year, Eliza warned, but with proper care, you could see significant improvement by next season. Peach trees are remarkably resilient. Like me, I thought, but didn't say. With a plan in place, I began dividing my time between Savannah and the farm. 3 days in town, handling practical matters, mail, banking, packing items I wanted to bring to the farmhouse. 4 days at the farm, working alongside Eliza and Jamal, a local handyman she'd recommended who was helping with the more structural repairs. Each week, I brought another carload of belongings to McDonough: books, kitchenware, family photos, the quilt Thomas's mother had made for our wedding. Gradually, the farmhouse began to feel less like the Jenkins home and more like mine. I replaced the faded wallpaper in the living room with a warm yellow paint, installed new flooring in the kitchen, and splurged on a deep farmhouse sink that made washing garden vegetables a joy rather than a chore. The front bedroom, Mr. Jenkins's room, became mine, its Spartan furnishings replaced with my own familiar bed and dresser. The sewing room I kept largely intact, touched by Mrs. Jenkins's lingering presence. Her sewing machine now shared space with my desk and bookshelves, creating a hybrid office craft room that suited my needs perfectly. As May turned to June, the farm began its transformation. Jamal repaired the chicken coop and built raised beds for the vegetable garden according to Eliza's specifications. I ordered heritage vegetable seeds and planted them according to the companion planting chart she'd created. Tomatoes surrounded by basil to deter pests, marigolds bordering everything to repel nematodes, climbing beans sharing space with corn in the traditional Native American Three Sisters configuration. We pruned the peach trees carefully, removing dead wood and opening the canopies to allow better air circulation. Eliza taught me to identify the early signs of common diseases and how to treat them with organic solutions. Neem oil instead of chemical fungicides, diatomaceous earths instead of synthetic pesticides. The conventional growers would spray these trees 6 to 8 times a season with heavy-duty chemicals, she explained as we worked. We'll use more targeted natural interventions and accept that our fruit might not look as perfect as the grocery store varieties, but it will taste better and be healthier for both the consumers and the environment. The first harvest in late June was modest. Only about 30% of the trees produced viable fruit, and much of that was smaller than commercial standards. But holding that first sun-warmed peach in my palm, inhaling its sweet fragrance, taking that initial juicy bite, it felt like a victory beyond measure. Eliza helped me set up a small stand at the McDonough Farmers Market, where we offered our limited harvest under a hand-painted sign, Jenkins Farm Heritage Peaches, organically grown. To my surprise, we sold out within 2 hours. People are hungry for real food, Eliza explained as we packed up our empty baskets. They can taste the difference. By mid-July, I had established a rhythm to my new life. Mornings began early, 5:30 a.m. during the hottest part of summer, with coffee on the porch swing, watching the sun rise over the orchard. Then came farm chores, watering the vegetable garden before the heat intensified, checking peach trees for signs of stress or disease, harvesting whatever was ripe. Afternoons, when the Georgia sun made outdoor work unbearable, I retreated to the house for indoor projects, preserving excess produce, researching organic farming techniques, planning improvements for the coming seasons. I started a detailed farm journal, recording everything from weather patterns to harvest yields to wildlife sightings. Evenings were for simple pleasures, dinner made from my own vegetables, reading on the porch until twilight faded to darkness, listening to the symphony of cicadas and crickets that replaced Savannah's urban soundscape. Some nights, Eliza or Jamal would join me for meals, our conversations ranging from agricultural innovations to local history, to personal dreams. I made connections in the community as well. The owners of the neighboring property, the Thompsons, a retired couple who kept horses, stopped by with welcome baskets and offers to help. The local feed store owner, Mr. Clement, became a valuable source of practical advice. The librarian in town, Ms. Beatty, set aside gardening books she thought might interest me. Through it all, I maintained my Savannah property, returning every 2 weeks to check on things and collect mail. I told curious neighbors I was spending time at a friend's country place, not ready to explain the full extent of my transformation. My book club accepted my sporadic attendance without much question, and my volunteer commitments at the children's hospital were adjusted to accommodate my new schedule. Only one relationship remained painfully unresolved. David had not contacted me since that terrible morning, nor had I reached out to him. Charlotte had sent a stiff, formal thank you note for my wedding gift, a vintage silver serving tray that had been in Thomas's family, but it contained no personal message beyond the obligatory expressions of gratitude. I thought about them often, wondering if they had found another house, if the honeymoon had been everything they'd hoped, if marriage was meeting their expectations. Sometimes, alone in the farmhouse at night, I would allow myself a few tears for what had been lost. But increasingly, those moments of grief were balanced by a growing sense of purpose, of independence, of authentic joy in my new endeavors. As August approached, bringing with it the most abundant part of the peach harvest, I made a significant decision. It was time to commit fully to my farm project. Elisa was preparing to return to her graduate studies, but she had connected me with a network of local organic farmers who offered support and knowledge sharing. I felt ready to take the next step. I hired a property management company to oversee my Savannah house, with instructions to keep it maintained but not to seek tenants yet. I transferred my primary mail service to a P.O. box in McDonough. I registered my farm as an official business entity, Wilson Heritage Farms. "Are you sure about the name change?" Jamal asked as he hammered the new sign into place at the end of the driveway. "People around here still call this the Jenkins place." I nodded, watching as the freshly painted sign caught the morning light. "It's time. Mr. Jenkins created something beautiful here, but now it's my turn to build on his legacy while creating my own." The irony wasn't lost on me. My son had cruelly suggested I go live with the pigs on the farm, intending it as the ultimate dismissal. Yet here I was, not just surviving, but thriving in exactly that scenario, though I had chickens rather than pigs. A detail I found amusingly pedantic. What David had meant as an insult had instead become my salvation, my rebirth, my unexpected third act. As summer began its slow transition toward fall, I found myself standing in the orchard one evening, watching fireflies rise from the grass like earthbound stars. The peach trees stood in orderly rows, their branches now relieved of most of their fruit, but already preparing for next year's cycle. In that moment of twilight tranquility, I realized something profound. I was no longer running away from David's rejection. I was running toward a future of my own design, and that future, against all expectations, included pigs. After all, I had just placed a deposit on 3 heritage breed piglets that would arrive in September, Gloucester Old Spots, known for their docile temperament and ability to thrive in orchard settings. As Eliza had explained, they would provide natural cleanup of fallen fruit, pest control, and eventually an additional product for the farm to offer. David's cutting words, meant to wound, had instead become prophecy and foundation for an empowering new chapter in my life. But the greatest twist in this unexpected journey was still to come, a development that would leave my son speechless and force him to reconsider everything he thought he knew about his burden of a mother. The arrival of fall brought dramatic changes to Wilson Heritage Farms. My 3 Gloucester Old Spot piglets, whom I named Bacon, Hamlet, and Porkchop in a fit of whimsy, settled into their spacious pen adjacent to the orchard. They quickly became my most entertaining companions, greeting me with enthusiastic snorts each morning and competing for scratches behind their floppy ears. Despite their youth, they proved remarkably effective at cleaning up fallen fruit and turning the soil with their natural rooting behavior. They're like living tractors, I explained to Eliza during one of her monthly consulting visits. Though she had returned to her graduate studies, she remained involved with the farm, offering guidance and connecting me with resources in exchange for using my operation as a case study in sustainable agriculture. Historically, that's exactly how they were used, she agreed, watching as the piglets systematically worked a section of ground where we planned to expand the vegetable garden. Pigs in orchards are an ancient farming practice we're just rediscovering. Industrial agriculture separated everything into monocultures, but integrated systems like this are actually more efficient. By October, I had fully embraced my new identity as a farmer. My days followed the rhythm of the seasons rather than the clock, rising with the sun, working outdoors until fatigue or weather dictated a break, retiring early most evenings, but occasionally staying up to track meteor showers or lunar eclipses from my porch swing. The physical labor transformed my body, replacing the softness of retirement with lean muscle. My hands, once manicured for classroom presentation, now bore calluses I displayed with quiet pride. The vegetable garden had exceeded all expectations, producing enough that I'd been forced to learn canning and preserving techniques to avoid waste. My pantry shelves now held jewel-toned jars of tomatoes, pickles, relishes, and jams, each representing hours of honest work and promising flavor during the coming winter months. The peach harvest, while not commercially significant this first season, had provided enough fruit for several dozen jars of preserves and a small but loyal customer base at the local farmers market. It was at this market, on a crisp Saturday morning in mid-October, that fate took an unexpected turn. I was arranging jars of peach preserves and bags of organic arugula on my modest table when a woman approached, examining my products with professional interest. "These preserves, they're made without commercial pectin?" she asked, lifting a jar to the light to examine its color. "Yes," I confirmed. "Just peaches, a bit of lemon juice, and organic cane sugar. The natural pectin in the fruit does the work if you cook it properly." She nodded approvingly, then extended her hand. "I'm Sophia Barnett, executive chef at the Hearthstone in Atlanta. We're looking for authentic farm products for our new fall menu." The Hearthstone was one of Atlanta's most celebrated farm-to-table restaurants, known for showcasing local ingredients in sophisticated presentations. The idea that my humble preserves might interest them seemed almost laughable. "I'm flattered," I said honestly, "but I'm just a small operation. This is my first season, and quantities are limited." "Limited quantity often means superior quality," Sophia replied, "and we're interested in the story as much as the product. Our customers want to know where their food comes from, who grew it, why it matters." She studied me with keen eyes. "Why don't you tell me your story, Ms. Wilson?" "Margaret Wilson." "Well, Margaret Wilson, what brought you to farming at—" She paused, clearly trying to estimate my age diplomatically. "At 67, I supplied with a small smile. "It's a second career, or third, technically."
Over the next 20 minutes, as other market patrons browsed nearby stalls, I gave Sophia an abbreviated version of my journey. Retired chemistry teacher, widowed, seeking a new challenge. I omitted the painful details about David, focusing instead on the positive aspects of my transition to farm life. Sophia listened attentively, occasionally jotting notes in a small book. "This is exactly the kind of narrative our customers connect with," she said when I'd finished.
"Authenticity, resilience, quality over quantity. Would you be open to supplying the Hearthstone exclusively with whatever preserves you have available? We'd credit you on the menu, of course." The opportunity was unexpected but welcome. We negotiated terms on the spot, a fair price that recognized the handcrafted nature of my products, a commitment to seasonal availability rather than forced consistency, an agreement to maintain organic practices. By the time Sophia left my booth, carrying samples to share with her sous chefs, I had secured my first restaurant contract. This initial success triggered a cascade of others. The Hearthstone's fall menu featured a cheese plate that included my peach preserves, complete with a brief description of Wilson Heritage Farms. Other chefs visited the restaurant, tasted my products, and sought me out. By Thanksgiving, I was supplying 4 high-end Atlanta establishments with various preserves, and a selection of winter vegetables from my expanded garden. In early December, I received a call from Sophia that would dramatically accelerate my farm's trajectory. "Margaret, there's someone you should meet," she began without preamble. "James Sullivan from Local Harvest magazine. They do features on sustainable agriculture in the Southeast, and I've mentioned your operation to him several times. He's interested in doing a profile. Local Harvest wasn't a mainstream publication, but within food circles and the sustainable agriculture community, it carried significant influence. A feature could bring attention to my fledgling operation and potentially open doors to new markets." "I'm not sure I'm profile-worthy yet," I demurred. "The farm is still developing." "That's precisely why it's interesting," Sophia insisted. "You're documenting the transformation from conventional to organic, from abandoned to productive. Plus, you're not exactly the typical young hipster farmer they usually feature. You bring a different perspective." 2 weeks later, James Sullivan arrived at my farm, a thoughtful man in his 50s with a photographer in tow. They spent the entire day with me, touring the property, discussing my methods and philosophy, photographing everything from the heritage piglets to my pantry of preserved goods. James was particularly interested in the business aspect of my operation. "Most small farms struggle financially," he noted as we sat at my kitchen table, reviewing my meticulous records. "But you found a viable niche in just one season. How did you approach the business planning?" I explained my strategy, focusing on high-value products rather than commodity crops, targeting chefs and specialty markets rather than competing with large producers, emphasizing quality and story over volume. "And the capital to start up?" he inquired. "That's another common barrier. I was fortunate to have savings," I acknowledged. "Teaching doesn't make you rich, but I've always been careful with money, and my needs are simple. No exotic vacations or luxury cars, just books and good soil." The resulting article, published in February's issue of Local Harvest, exceeded my expectations. Titled "Second Harvest: How a Retired Teacher is Redefining Success at Wilson Heritage Farms," it portrayed my operation as an innovative model for sustainable small-scale agriculture. The photographer had captured images that made my modest farm look magical. Morning light filtering through peach blossoms, piglets rooting contentedly among fallen fruit, jars of preserves glowing like stained glass on pantry shelves. Most powerfully, the article framed my age as an asset rather than a liability. Margaret Wilson brings a lifetime of experience to her new venture: the patience of a teacher, the precision of a chemist, the resilience of a woman who has weathered personal loss. Where younger farmers might chase trends or overextend, Wilson moves with deliberate purpose, making decisions based on long-term sustainability rather than immediate gratification. "I'm not building a business to sell in 5 years," she explains. "I'm creating a legacy that honors the land and might inspire others to consider that it's never too late to grow something new." The response was immediate and overwhelming. My email inbox filled with messages from readers, some seeking advice, others sharing similar stories of late-life reinvention, many asking if my farm offered tours or workshops. Local news stations requested interviews. Nearby farming communities invited me to speak at their meetings. Most significantly, a producer from the popular public television series American Harvests contacted me about featuring Wilson Heritage Farms in an upcoming episode focused on innovative small-scale agriculture in the Southeast. "We're particularly interested in farms that challenge conventional assumptions," the producer explained during our initial phone call. "Your transition from education to agriculture at retirement age, your focus on heritage varieties and integrated systems, these perspectives aren't often represented in mainstream coverage of farming." The television feature, filmed in early spring as the peach trees burst into glorious bloom, aired in April, exactly 1 year after David's wedding and his subsequent cruel dismissal. The timing felt poetic, though of course the production team knew nothing of that personal history. The segment beautifully captured what I'd built, not just a working farm, but a demonstration of principle, a refutation of ageism, a model of resilience. The cameras followed me through daily chores, lingered on the now adolescent pigs clearing an area for new planting, showcased the expanded vegetable operation where I was experimenting with heirloom varieties of southern crops. Most powerfully, the segment concluded with me seated on my front porch swing, watching the sunset over the orchard as I reflected on my journey. People often ask if I'm surprised by my success, and I have to say yes and no. Yes, because farming is notoriously difficult, and I had no formal training in agriculture. But no, because the principles that make a good teacher, patience, observation, adaptability, respect for natural processes, translate remarkably well to growing things. Both professions are fundamentally about nurturing potential and celebrating growth, even when it doesn't follow the expected timeline. The day after the segment aired, I received more emails than I could possibly answer, including several from former students delighted to see their chemistry teacher in such an unexpected context. The farm's website, created by one of Eliza's tech-savvy classmates in exchange for a summer's worth of produce, crashed repeatedly from excessive traffic. Among the flood of messages was one that stopped my heart momentarily. The sender, Charlotte Wilson. The subject line, "Your TV appearance." With trembling fingers, I opened it. "Mrs. Wilson," it began formally. "David and I saw you on American Harvest last night. We were quite surprised, as you might imagine. Your farm looks impressive. David wondered if perhaps we might visit sometime soon. There are matters we should discuss in person. Please let us know when might be convenient." No apology, no acknowledgement of the cruel words that had severed our relationship a year earlier. Just surprised that the woman they had dismissed as an irrelevant burden had transformed herself into someone worthy of television coverage. I waited 3 days before responding. Days spent consulting with Eliza, speaking with my closest friends among the local farming community, and meditating on what I truly wanted from any potential reconciliation. "Charlotte," I finally wrote, "thank you for reaching out. The farm keeps me quite busy, as you can imagine, but I could make time for visitors this Sunday afternoon if that suits your schedule. The dirt road can be challenging for city cars. I recommend the SUV rather than David's sedan if you still have it." I included directions, then added a final line. "Please note that this is a working farm. Appropriate footwear is advisable." Sunday dawned clear and warm, a perfect spring day that showcased the farm at its best. The peach trees were transitioning from bloom to early fruit formation, their branches dotted with tiny green promises of summer harvest. The vegetable gardens were neat rows of emerging seedlings, carefully labeled with hand-painted markers. The pigs, now substantial juveniles, grunted contentedly in their spacious enclosure as they enjoyed a breakfast of kitchen scraps and orchard windfalls. I had risen at dawn, as usual, completing essential chores before showering and changing into what had become my standard attire. Durable jeans, a comfortable flannel shirt with sleeves rolled to the elbow, well-worn boots. No special preparations for my visitors, no attempt to impress. This was my authentic life now, not a performance for their approval. At precisely 2 o'clock, I heard a vehicle navigating the gravel drive. From my position on the porch swing, I watched as a modest SUV, not the luxury vehicle they had driven to their wedding, parked beside my truck. David emerged from the driver's side, looking thinner than I remembered, his designer clothes replaced by simple khakis and a button-down shirt. Charlotte exited the passenger side, her once immaculate appearance notably subdued. Both surveyed the farm with undisguised curiosity before approaching the house. "Hello, Mom," David called, his voice carrying an unfamiliar note of uncertainty. "Your place looks amazing." I remained seated, not out of rudeness, but from a newfound sense of groundedness. This was my territory, my kingdom built through vision and hard work. For the first time in our adult relationship, David was entering my world rather than the reverse. "Welcome to Wilson Heritage Farms," I replied, voice steady. "It's good to see you both. Come sit. There's fresh lemonade if you'd like some." As they settled into porch chairs opposite my swing, I finally allowed myself to really look at my son. Beyond the physical changes, the weight loss, the shadows beneath his eyes, there was something fundamentally altered in his demeanor. The arrogance I'd last seen had been replaced by something that looked suspiciously like humility. Charlotte accepted a glass of lemonade with murmured thanks, then got straight to the point. Mrs. Wilson, Margaret, we owe you an apology. The things David said when we last met were inexcusable. David nodded, eyes fixed on his hands. I was cruel, horrible. I've regretted those words every day since. And yet it took seeing me on television to prompt this visit, I observed, keeping my tone neutral rather than accusatory. He flinched but didn't deny it. I was ashamed, too ashamed to face you after what I'd said. Then when we saw you on that show, looking so capable, so fulfilled, it was like seeing a stranger I realized I wanted to know. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider that this visit might represent genuine remorse rather than opportunism. What matters now is where we go from here, I said finally. Tell me what's been happening in your lives. The truth, please, not the glossy version. The story emerged haltingly. David had indeed lost his engineering position when the firm downsized unexpectedly. Charlotte's family, facing financial difficulties of their own due to unwise investments, had been unable to provide the support the young couple had counted on. Without the cushion of privilege they'd assumed would always be there, they'd been forced to downsize dramatically, moving from their luxury apartment to a modest rental, selling most of their expensive possessions to cover basic expenses. It's been humbling, Charlotte admitted, her previously perfect manicure now replaced by practical, unpolished nails. But educational. We've learned what actually matters. I've been doing freelance engineering work, David added. It's inconsistent, but it's something. Charlotte's been amazing, finding ways to economize, taking on part-time work at a gallery. I nodded, absorbing their story without comment. There was no satisfaction in hearing of their difficulties, only recognition that life had offered them the same kind of reset it had given me, though through different circumstances. And now? I asked. What are your plans? They exchanged a glance filled with unspoken communication. That's partly why we're here, David said hesitantly. We've been thinking about leaving Atlanta. The cost of living is crushing us, and the corporate world has lost its appeal for both of us. We've been exploring alternatives. What your son is trying to say, Charlotte interjected with newfound directness, is that seeing your farm on television made us wonder if there might be a place for us in something similar. Not necessarily farming specifically, but a more sustainable, meaningful lifestyle. I studied them both, looking for signs of insincerity or calculation. Finding none, I made a decision that would alter all our futures. There's a guest cottage on the other side of the orchard, I said carefully. The previous owner's daughter lived there for a while. It needs work, but it's structurally sound. You're welcome to stay there while you figure out your next steps. In exchange, I could use help with the spring planting and some infrastructure projects I've been postponing. The hope that blossomed on their faces was almost painful to witness. You'd let us stay here? After everything? David asked, voice cracking slightly. Not as a handout, I clarified firmly. As an opportunity to contribute while you reorient yourselves. This farm has taught me that everything worthwhile requires tending. Plants, animals, and yes, relationships. I'm willing to see if ours can grow into something new, provided you're both ready to put in the necessary work. As the conversation continued into the evening, plans taking shape with unexpected ease, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. David's cruel words, "Go live with the pigs on the farm," had been intended as the ultimate rejection. Instead, they had become a catalyst for my most authentic life, one rich with purpose, community, and now, the possibility of family reconciliation on more equal terms. Sometimes I realize the best to sweetest revenge isn't about getting even, but about getting free. Free to redefine success, to reinvent yourself, to reclaim your worth. And in doing so, you create the possibility for others to grow as well, even those who once dismissed you as nothing more than a burden. Life has a peculiar way of transforming our deepest wounds into unexpected opportunities. When my son David stood in my living room that terrible morning and shouted, "Go live with the pigs on the farm," he intended it as the ultimate insult, a dismissal of my worth as a person, as a mother, as a human being deserving of dignity and respect. Those words cut deeper than any physical wound could have, coming from the child I had sacrificed everything to raise, to educate, to give opportunities I never had myself. What David couldn't possibly have known was that his cruel command would become the catalyst for the most fulfilling chapter of my life. At 67, when society expected me to quietly fade into irrelevance, I found the courage to reinvent myself completely. The journey from devastated mother to successful organic farmer wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, physical exhaustion, and yes, loneliness. Nights when I sat on that farmhouse porch, listening to unfamiliar country sounds and wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. But with each passing day, each new skill mastered, each small victory, the first successful harvest, the first farmer's market sale, the first restaurant contract, I grew stronger and more certain. The woman who had defined herself primarily as David's mother, Thomas's widow, a dedicated teacher, discovered new identities: farmer, entrepreneur, preserver of heritage agricultural practices, mentor to younger agricultural enthusiasts like Eliza. The physical transformation was remarkable. My body, which I had begun to see through society's ageist lens as deteriorating and weak, revealed itself to be remarkably adaptable. Muscles I had forgotten existed strengthened with daily use. My mind, freed from the subtle fog of routine and complacency, sharpened as it tackled new challenges, calculating optimal planting schedules, researching organic pest management, developing preservation techniques that maximized both flavor and shelf life. My social world expanded in ways I never anticipated. Where I had feared isolation in rural Georgia, I discovered a vibrant community of like-minded individuals, neighboring farmers sharing generations of local knowledge, agricultural extension agents eager to support sustainable practices, chefs passionate about authentic ingredients with genuine stories behind them. In many ways, I found myself more deeply connected to others than I had been in years, engaged in relationships based on shared values and mutual respect rather than obligation or habit. The farm itself became an extension of my personality, practical but beautiful, productive but sustainable, rooted in tradition while embracing innovation. Each decision, from which heritage peach varieties to nurture to how to integrate the pigs into the orchard ecosystem, reflected a philosophy that valued long-term stewardship over short-term gain. Wilson Heritage Farms became not just a business, but a demonstration of possibility, a living argument that age is not a barrier to meaningful contribution. And then, when I least expected it, came the opportunity for reconciliation. The television feature that brought David and Charlotte back into my life wasn't just about exposure for my farm. It was the bridge across a chasm I had feared was unbridgeable. Seeing them on my porch that Sunday afternoon, humbled by their own life challenges, ready to acknowledge their mistakes and seek a new beginning, I realized that growth was possible for all of us. The cottage renovation project has become a metaphor for our rebuilding relationship. David, once dismissive of physical labor as beneath his professional dignity, has discovered unexpected satisfaction in tangible accomplishments: a repaired roof, a reinforced foundation, a garden bed built with his own hands. Charlotte, raised with servants to handle domestic tasks, has embraced canning and preserving with surprising enthusiasm, her artist's eye bringing new aesthetic appeal to my product packaging. Most importantly, we're learning to communicate honestly, to express needs and boundaries clearly, to acknowledge that love doesn't require perfection, but does demand respect. The dynamics have shifted fundamentally. No longer am I the supplicant mother seeking scraps of attention from her superior son. We meet as adults with different but equally valuable skills and perspectives, collaborating rather than competing. I don't know what the future holds for Wilson Heritage Farms. Perhaps it will grow into a larger operation. Perhaps it will remain small and specialized. Perhaps David and Charlotte will eventually move on to their own ventures. Perhaps they'll choose to put down roots here. What matters is that we all have choices now. Choices based not on fear or obligation, but on authentic desires and values. My story isn't unique. Countless people, especially women of a certain age, find themselves dismissed, devalued, relegated to the margins by a society that equates youth with relevance and conventional success with worth. If you're watching this and feeling invisible, underestimated, or discarded, please know that your third act might be your most magnificent. The words meant to diminish you can become the very foundation of your renaissance. This is why I'm sharing my journey on Revenge Expected. Not because I want to gloat about proving my son wrong. That would be petty and, frankly, unworthy of the person I've become. I'm sharing because stories like mine need to be told. They need to circulate, to inspire, to remind people that new beginnings don't come with age limits. If my story has resonated with you in any way, I ask 3 things. First, please subscribe to the Revenge Expected channel. Each subscription helps ensure that stories of resilience and reinvention reach wider audiences. People need to hear that rejection can be the doorway to redirection, that endings often contain the seeds of more authentic beginnings. Second, take a moment to like this video and leave a comment below. I'd love to know if you've experienced something similar, a dismissal that became a catalyst, an insult that ironically pointed you toward your true path. Or perhaps you're standing at that crossroads right now, gathering courage for your own leap of faith. Your comments create community around these shared experiences, reminding us all that we're not alone in our struggles or our triumphs. Finally, if you found value in this story and have the means to do so, please consider supporting Revenge Expected through Super Thanks, the donation feature that helps cover the costs of producing these daily videos. Your contribution, whatever the amount, allows this channel to continue seeking out and sharing stories that might otherwise remain untold. Stories that challenge prevailing narratives about aging, about recovery from betrayal, about the remarkable human capacity for reinvention. Before you go, take a moment to explore the channel's other videos. Each one features someone who, like me, refused to be defined by rejection or limitation. The circumstances differ. Some involve workplace discrimination, others focus on family estrangement or recovery from toxic relationships. But the underlying message remains consistent. The most powerful response to dismissal is to thrive in unexpected ways. As for me, tomorrow morning I'll wake at dawn as usual, pour my coffee, and head out to check on the peach trees. The pigs, now full grown and with offspring of their own, will greet me with their characteristic enthusiasm. David will likely be in the workshop, continuing his latest project, while Charlotte experiments with a new preserve recipe in the commercial kitchen we built last year. My life isn't perfect. No authentic life ever is. But it's rich with purpose, connection, and an abiding sense of rightness that no cruel words can ever again disturb. Remember, the best revenge isn't living well to spite others. It's living authentically because you finally understand your own worth. Subscribe now to Revenge Expected and join a community that believes in the power of turning pain into purpose, rejection into redirection, and cruel dismissals into unexpected opportunities for growth.